Today, we're going to plug into a 19th century invention that, no joke, laid the literal wires for our modern world. I'm talking about the electrical telegraph. Before we had the internet, before the telephone, this was the first technology that truly conquered distance. So how did this whole thing even come to be? And what can its story teach us about our own hyper-connected age? It all really kicks off with these 4 words. What hath God wrought? Tapped out in a series of electrical pulses, this message flew almost instantly from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore. Can you imagine being there? For the people watching, it must have seemed like pure magic. It was the moment that announced to everyone that, yep, we had just entered a brand new era of communication. So what exactly was this thing? Well, at its heart, the electrical telegraph was a brilliantly simple idea. You use a controlled burst of electricity to send a coded message down a wire. That's it. But it was the very first time we could speak to someone miles and miles away without yelling or sending a physical letter. This was the birth of telecommunication. To really get just how much this changed everything, you have to picture the world before the telegraph. I mean, it was a world where information could only move as fast as the fastest horse, or the fastest train, or the fastest ship. And this sled, wow, it just puts that slowness into perfect perspective. Look at this. Sending a message from London to Sydney took 73 days. 73. Imagine trying to run a business, or govern an empire, or just send a note to a loved one and then having to wait over 2 months for a reply. This insane delay wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a fundamental roadblock that inventors all over the world were desperate to smash. But you know, the path to a working telegraph wasn't some straight line. Oh no. It was a long, messy, and totally fascinating journey of experimentation. You had all these brilliant minds chasing these little sparks of an idea, and a lot of the time the results were, well, they were pretty strange. You see, the whole concept couldn't even exist until some key scientific pieces fell into place. First, you have Volta's battery in 1800, which finally gave inventors a steady source of electricity. Then, in 1820, Ørsted figures out that this current creates a magnetic field. That's huge, because it means electricity can cause physical movement. And finally, guys like Sturgeon and Henry perfect the electromagnet, making that movement strong enough to actually do something, like flick a needle or make a click from miles away. And check this out. This is one of the wildest early attempts. In 1809, a guy named Submarine built a telegraph that needed 35 separate wires. 35. One for almost every letter and number. And to read the message, you had to watch for hydrogen bubbles to appear in different little jars of acid. I mean, points for creativity, for sure. But practical? Not so much. Then there was Francis Ronalds. A few years later, he built a working system using static electricity. He even buried 8 miles of wire in his garden to prove it worked. He offered it to the British Admiralty, and they famously wrote back that his invention was, and I quote, wholly unnecessary. It's just a perfect reminder that sometimes even the best ideas get shot down at first. Okay, so now we get to the 1830s, and this is the decade where everything changes. All the science is there, the need is obvious, and the race is officially on to create the first commercial telegraph. And 2 major players step into the ring, one on each side of the Atlantic. So on the left, you see the British system from Cooke and Wheatstone. It's this complex thing with multiple needles that would literally point to letters on a board. And on the right, you have the American system from Samuel Morse, which was just a simple key tapping out a code of dots and dashes. 2 very different solutions to the exact same problem. And here's the crucial difference. The Cooke and Wheatstone system was super easy to use. Anyone could look at it and read the message. But it was complicated and expensive, needing 5 or 6 wires to work. Morse's system, on the other hand, was brilliantly simple and cheap. It only needed a single wire. The catch: you needed trained operators who could understand the code. In the end, as it so often does, economics won out. The simpler, cheaper system was the one that was going to scale. And this was Morse's big moment. That public demonstration in 1844 proved to the whole world that his simple, single-wire system wasn't just possible, it was incredibly effective. The message, "What hath God wrought?" wasn't just a test, it was a global advertisement that distance had finally been defeated. After that demonstration, man, the floodgates just burst open. For the next few decades, the world went on an absolute frenzy of laying wires, creating what a lot of historians now call the Victorian internet. And honestly, it's the perfect name for it. Just look at these numbers from 1852. This is less than 10 years after Morse's big demo. The United States already had 23,000 miles of wire. That is almost enough to wrap around the entire planet. The speed of adoption was just breathtaking. And this new network had immediate, dramatic effects. You know that romantic image of the Pony Express rider racing across the plains? That whole operation lasted less than 2 years. The day the transcontinental telegraph line was finished, the Pony Express was done, obsolete. Just a perfect example of how a new technology can completely disrupt an old one practically overnight. But the final boss was still out there, the oceans. I mean, the sheer vastness of the Atlantic. After a bunch of expensive, heartbreaking failures, the first successful permanent transatlantic cable was finally laid in 1866. And just like that, a message that used to take 12 days by ship could now cross the ocean in minutes. This map really gives you a sense of what it all led to. By the end of the 19th century, this web of copper wires and undersea cables had wrapped itself around the entire globe. News, business, personal messages, they could circle the planet in hours instead of months. For the first time in human history, we were a truly connected species. But hold on, this story doesn't end there. The telegraph wasn't just revolutionary on its own. It was the seed from which our entire modern communications network grew. The constant push to make it better led directly to the next big thing. So the first big push was for automation. We needed to get the human bottleneck out of the way. So we went from skilled operators tapping out code to printing telegraphs that used keyboards, and eventually to fully automated teletype machines. These could send and receive messages all on their own, creating this global network called telex. But even with all that automation, there was this one huge fundamental problem. Laying thousands of miles of copper wire across continents and oceans was incredibly expensive. So the new holy grail for inventors was this: how can we send more than one message down that single pricey wire at the same time? The breakthrough idea was something they called the harmonic telegraph. And the concept was really elegant. What if you could send several messages at once, but each one was riding on a different musical pitch or frequency? Then, at the other end, you'd have receivers tuned to each specific frequency, and they'd pick out their own message. And that's when inventors, including a guy you might have heard of named Alexander Graham Bell, had this unbelievable light bulb moment. They realized, wait a second, if we can send a handful of different frequencies for a few telegraph signals, what if we could send all the complex frequencies of the human voice at once? And that's it. The quest to improve the telegraph, to squeeze more data down the wire, led directly to the invention of the telephone. So the next time you send a text or make a video call, just take a second to remember the simple clicks and dashes that started it all. The electrical telegraph wasn't just the Victorian internet. It was the great-great-grandfather of everything we use today. And it really makes you wonder, right? What are the communication problems we're trying to solve today? And what completely unexpected inventions are they going to lead to next?